Okay, next news topic, and not so much a news topic as something that caught Alex's eye. I'm just looking at this YouTube comment that he's done the screenshot of and put on our docket. Glad to see Alex finally review some games without stutter struggle. So this goes back to the video we did about the NVIDIA GeForce 7800 GTX, right? We're looking at really older games by this point, 20-year-old games. And the conceived notion is that games didn't stutter in the past, certainly not to the degree they do now. Alex, take it away, because you've just put here on the docket, did older games stutter less on PC than modern ones? So I need some answers.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually just very generically answer the question, because that was a question that was posed in that thread of comments. Did older games stutter less than current games? And the answer is yes. Actually, it is very much so the case. Now, the reasons for that are varied, and they're interesting. I want to talk about them. But I originally wanted to broach this subject a number of years ago when I wanted to talk about shader compilation stutter in a dedicated video. And one of my examples for why it is so bad is because it was one of the first problems in PC gaming where no amount of hardware you throw at it, even over a decent amount of time, is going to make it that much better, because the level of magnitude of difference between your base frame time and the frame time stutter was so large that we're talking about decades of computing before it becomes actually something that you can't visibly notice anymore. Right. If you had a base frame time of, 10 milliseconds and the frame time stutter was 250, well, how much more computing do you need advancement to get that back down to around 10? A lot.
Arguably, it's going to get worse over time, because the delta between the between the stutter and your average frame rate is only going to increase, right?
Yeah. So if you're at like 5 ms with 2 times more powerful hardware, the 125 millisecond frame time stutter is going to arguably look even worse. So, that's the thing and I didn't like that at all. And I wanted to show that older games were CPU limited, very CPU limited, actually. Right. But they had a consistency while being CPU limited. And I was going to show that Quake, for example, would run at like 20 FPS, but it was consistently, around that millisecond frame time. And I wanted to show that. And this comment brought me back to those thoughts that I had back then when I was planning this video that I never ended up making. And the truth of the matter is, yes, older games, when you go back to them, a lot of them have very clean frame times, even while CPU limited. And I think that was because there was on the game programming side of things, games were still, it wasn't this mass entertainment like we see today, where it is like one of the largest entertainment things that exists. It was smaller, and the dev pool was smaller, and the people that went into it, you had I'm not saying like quality here, but to make a game, you needed to start from the ground up. There weren't a lot of middleware engines that existed. So you had to do a lot from the ground up, and that required then a lot of, knowledge and purpose-built stuff. A game was purpose-built to do a very specific thing. Now you have a middleware engine that can do a lot of things, but you need to be much more precise with it to prevent issues from happening. But that's not the case, because a lot of games can just be made entirely without engine programmers these days, which is just a very big difference in how games are developed now. So that's one of the reasons that we see this happening. Another reason is because back in the day, especially in PC games, and I would also argue in console land at that point in time, games were not constantly streaming things. At the most, they were doing like a trickle stream from a disc for certain things, maybe audio, things like that. Yep. But a lot of games had split up levels, and open worlds were, when they did exist, they were very, very barren. They didn't have a lot of diverse objects in them, a lot of repetition, a lot of things that could already be in memory or very slowly trickled out from the disk when you move through the world. Because disks were slow and had a lot of slow speed up time. Now, disks are fast, and we actualize thousands of actors when we move through an area, and game developers haven't gotten very good at the moment of doing that in a largely parallel way. So, especially Unreal Engine, for example. So we have an entirely different paradigm of the way games are made. The games that did do larger levels actually, and a diverse level of detail did have problems back in the day. I did a video with John covering the original Oblivion running on period correct hardware while John was over there playing the remastered version. And I kept complaining the entire time how the original version was stuttering when you'd cross through the grid cells in that game. We also did a video covering Half-Life 2 RTX Remix's pre-release demo. And I was playing on an original, I think it was a Pentium 4. I think I was playing that on, and an X800 XT. And that is a game that had larger levels that you would load into. And when you would cross segments of a Half-Life 2 level, it would also stutter. So it's not like that wasn't something that didn't happen, but it actually was more rare because of how game design was. And the last reason that I want to give here, and it's something that I discovered in my video, is shader compilation. Going back to play old games, I'm going to send Oliver some footage here. Played a lot of games. Almost none of them stuttered at all, in spite of me running an Athlon X2 3800 Plus and Windows XP 32-bit. And even though they were shader games that use shader model 2 and 3, and an interesting thing about going back to older games is to see that actually devs were aware of shader compilation even back then. You load up Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. When you change the settings and go back in game, it does a shader pre-compilation step. It even says it on screen. When you load up Battlefield 2, the first time you play a level, there's a shader compilation step. It even tells you we're compiling shaders right now. When you install the Robo Blitz game that I talked about, which made me laugh so much that I could remember this game exists, when the game is installing, it does a shader pre-compilation step. I'll send these videos to Oliver, but it's so funny seeing it even back then. And the reason they knew this was a problem, and so they were trying to get around it. And these are, very smart people back then, but they had a much less diverse set of shaders to worry about. Everything was like blin fong lit, there was like 2 different materials in a game. This is like these were very less complex things. And so they could get away with it, and they thought about it. And, these were games I also covered were made from like the top end people making PC games back then. So nowadays, though, artists can make as many shaders as they want. The engines are not designed to limit that, Unreal especially. And we have a million of them, and games are bigger than before with more diverse assets. So collecting them is a chore. And as a result now, you can find shader compilation stuttering games when in the past you really didn't that often at all. It was possible though still. And that was one of my key takeaways from doing the 7800 GTX video that I really wanted to impart to the audience here was I was going back and playing games that were not running at 60, but they weren't also having like large 150 millisecond frame time stutters, 250 milliseconds, whatever. The only ones that would pop up would be, of course, save checkpoint stuff. That's stuff that games have had forever, though. And that would have been an amazing experience back in the day. But the only difference between then and now, that where things are really a lot better now, is you don't have to worry about VSync these days. You have VRR panels. Back in the days when you'd be in that like no man's land of like 40 FPS, you'd be triple buffering, or you'd be having to turn off VSync to just have full screen tearing. And that wasn't a great place to be. And things now with VRR, you can be in that more frame rate no man's land that is not divisible by your refresh rate and still have a really great time. So things have gotten better, but I really want to talk about the fact that actually games were less stuttery back in the day. And there's good reasons why.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Oliver, what do you make of that?
Well, it's funny you mentioned your setup there, because I actually had an AMD Athlon 3800 Plus in my first gaming PC, but I didn't have a 7800 GTX. I don't think that it launched by then. I had a 6800 GT, which was still a pretty
amazing GPU though.
Yeah,
still.
pretty great GPU for the time. I certainly don't think during that period I had enough experience or my eyes were trained enough to really discriminate between different performance levels. I just remember I have a general experience of like, you know, I was playing World of Warcraft at like 20 frames per second on my laptop with an integrated horrible graphics, chipset graphics. And then I moved over to that system and it was like 60 FPS at, what would it be? 1280 by 1024. What would it be that resolution?
The 5x4 resolution. 5x4
resolution. Exactly. With like MSAA turned on, and certainly have that experience. But for most titles, I mean, it was not super common to hit a lock 60 FPS. Back then in like a title like Half-Life 2, I'd be getting more like 40, 45 FPS with typically, you know, high settings at the panel resolution. It would not be a 60 FPS experience. Ditto for Doom. I actually remember going back down to like 768p for Doom, just to have a little bit of a cleaner experience there in terms of the resolution, the frame rate. But yeah, it does make sense that games stuttered less because of the factors that you mentioned. But I do feel like the VSync thing is really critical in there, because nowadays with the VRR, you can really safely cap a game to a good frame rate and know that even when you're dropping below that frame rate, VRR is mostly going to save you most of the time, absent some stuttering issues. So I feel like, and overall the performance level of games nowadays is much higher. It just flat out is much higher than games back then. The general level of performance people are expecting nowadays with their 300 hertz monitors and things like that, it's in a completely different category to what people were getting back in the day running cutting edge PC games like Far Cry or Doom 3 or Half-Life 2 on PC hardware, contemporary PC hardware at the time. So I feel like there has been a lot of improvements, but definitely in the realm of shader compilation and streaming issues. Perhaps there have been some notable regressions.
I was just looking at the video, Alex, and thinking to myself, the comments for the reviews for the 7800 GTX would be something like, what, it can't run Splinter Cell at a locked 60 frames per second? It's a disaster. But the comments never change on GPU reviews. The performance will never be good enough at whatever. Was there any sort of contemporary discussion at the time about how shader Model 3 is a disaster because it tanks frame rate?
No, not necessarily. But the video brought up a number of conspiracy theories that I remember back from the day because I saw them being posted again. And one of the best ones is I had an X800 XT back in the day, which was only shader model 2.0 compliant, 9.0B. Mm-hmm. And shader model 3 advanced in a number of categories over the base version of DirectX 9, so that games of the future really couldn't actually run on those shader model 2 cards. But back in the day, there was a lot of conspiracy theories about this is not big NVIDIA in the background pushing the industry around, not letting us run the latest games on our 2 to 3 year old hardware. Because Shader Model 3 came out and a lot of games just started to only allow Shader Model 3, actually, because they were being ported to consoles, which were Shader Model 3.
Including an Xbox I saw this by Microsoft.
Yeah, I know, right? I saw this conspiracy theory in some of the comments of this video, actually an X850 XT could have been running this game at a very similar performance. It's just NVIDIA forced it to be Shader Model 3. So I loved seeing that again. Reading the reviews, though, I read Anontex, I read Tom Hardware, I read Guru 3D, I read Computer Base. I think I read PC Hardwares as well, too. And they actually, it's so fun to go back and see how they view frame rates very differently. Like they have a chart that's you want to be between above 40 FPS, they would say. Nowadays, no one would ever say that for a modern GPU review, I don't think. I think things have just changed so much about what we expect of performance in games. And a lot of reviews also would just describe games as GPU killers. The Fear review, a lot of them, they would do things like turn off settings to make the game run better. Nowadays, you just crank everything to max and do your review and it runs fine, right? It's very rare to see a game that is a GPU killer these days in a great justified way. So I loved making this video. I want to make more in the future. And I think it broaches topics like this that are fun to talk about. Heck, this could have been a video in its own right, but I just wanted to talk about it on the direct.
I think we'd really like to do GeForce 3 and, of course, G80. There was there was comments in there saying, hey, this wasn't the generational leap, it was G80. And it's kind of yes and no.
Yeah, I mean,
obviously it had the features, right? The 7800.
Yeah, that's I always like that. That's hindsight telling you that it wasn't the leap. At the time, it was a leap. When you look at the performance, it was a leap. Actually, it was a great. Like if we got a game running 75%, like I didn't even show the percentage, but like Trackmania Sunrise runs 75% better on the 7800 GTX. If we got those kind of gen on gen uplifts, for a similar wattage, we'd be loving it, right? So yeah, that is a leap. It's just the next one that came after it was so mammoth that it eclipses it. It just becomes forgotten.
I'm looking forward to that video. That's going to be great.